I was scrolling through LinkedIn when I saw it. The group photo that shattered everything I thought I knew about friendship. 47 smiling faces from my old marketing team at Westfield Creative Solutions, all gathered at what they called a small reunion. The same reunion Riley Foster told me was just a few people getting coffee and really not worth the drive. But there they were, in matching navy blue t-shirts at Cedar Lake Resort, celebrating 10 years since our department was restructured. And I, the person who'd given 5 years of my life to that place, who'd worked overtime on the Davidson campaign that made half their careers, wasn't even a memory they'd bothered to include. But let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment, staring at my phone in complete shock, realizing that the people I'd considered my closest work family had orchestrated the most elaborate exclusion I'd ever experienced. It started 6 weeks ago on a rainy Thursday afternoon in March. I was sitting in my home office in my one-bedroom apartment in Bellingham, Washington, trying to make sense of a client's scattered brand guidelines when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Riley Foster's name, and I felt that familiar flutter of happiness. Riley had been more than just my cubicle neighbor during our 3 years together at Westfield Creative Solutions in Seattle. She'd been my work wife, my coffee companion, my partner in surviving the chaos of agency life. "Jess," she said, and I could hear the familiar sounds of downtown Seattle traffic in the background. "Quick question. You remember Alex Rodriguez from IT, right? The tall guy with the coffee addiction and the vintage band t-shirts?" "Of course," I said, pushing my laptop aside and settling back in my desk chair. I was working from my apartment in Bellingham, about 90 minutes north of where our old office used to be in Seattle's Belltown district. "Alex was always fixing my computer when I inevitably broke something." "Why, don't tell me he's finally starting that coffee blog he always talked about." Riley laughed, but it sounded forced, like she was reading from a script she hadn't quite memorized. "He's been asking about you, actually, wondering how the consulting thing is going, if you're happy with the freelance life. I told him you're probably too busy with all your new clients to think about the old days at Westfield." That comment hit me like a small slap. Riley knew better than anyone that I'd been struggling to build my client base since leaving Westfield 18 months ago. Just 3 weeks prior, I'd called her in tears after losing what I thought was going to be my biggest contract yet, a rebranding project for a local restaurant chain that would have covered my rent for 4 months. She'd listened to me vent for an hour about how maybe I'd made a mistake leaving the stability of agency life, how maybe I wasn't cut out for the uncertainty of freelancing. She knew I'd had to take on a part-time bookkeeping job at a veterinary clinic just to make ends meet. Why would she tell Alex I was too busy? "Actually, I'd love to catch up with Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's been ages since we talked. Do you have his current number? I think I still have his old one from when he was at Westfield, but I'm sure it's changed." "Oh, you know how it is. He's super swamped with some major system upgrade at his new company, pulling 12-hour days, sleeping at the office, the whole thing. I'm sure he'll reach out when things calm down. You know how Alex is with work stuff. When he's in deep on a project, the rest of the world just disappears." There was something in her tone that made me pause. Riley had always been direct, even blunt sometimes. She was the type of person who would say exactly what she meant, who never hedged or made excuses, but now she sounded like she was trying to end a conversation she had started, like she was already mentally moving on to something else. "Riley, is everything okay? You sound a little..." "Everything's great. Listen, I'm about to head into a client meeting. Big presentation for that sustainable fashion brand I told you about. Let's catch up properly soon, okay? Maybe we can finally do that girls' weekend in Portland we keep talking about." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me holding my phone and staring at the rain streaming down my apartment window. In all the years I'd known Riley, going back to when we'd started at Westfield on the same day as junior account coordinators, she'd never been the type to rush off calls with me. She was a talker, someone who could turn a 5-minute check-in into a 40-minute deep dive about everything from work drama to dating disasters to her theories about why the coffee at the new place near our old office was superior to Starbucks.
Our phone calls usually ended with one of us realizing we'd been talking for way too long and reluctantly saying goodbye. This abrupt ending felt wrong, like putting on a shirt that was the wrong size.
I set my phone on my desk and tried to get back to work, but I couldn't shake the conversation. Something about Riley's voice, the way she deflected my questions about Alex, the weird comment about me being too busy, it all sat uncomfortably in my chest like a piece of food that wouldn't go down. Over the next week, I found myself paying attention to small interactions in ways I never had before. It started with social media. Elena Torres, who had been our senior copywriter and someone I'd considered a genuine friend, posted a throwback photo from our department holiday party 2 years ago. It was from the December before I left Westfield, taken at that trendy cocktail bar in Capitol Hill that everyone had been excited to try. The photo showed 8 of us crowded around a high table, everyone wearing ugly Christmas sweaters and holding colorful drinks. I remembered that night clearly. We'd all stayed out way too late, sharing stories and laughing until our faces hurt. It had been one of those perfect work friend moments where you forget about deadlines and difficult clients and just enjoy being with people who understand your daily reality. Elena had tagged everyone in the photo except me. Alex was tagged, even though he was barely visible in the background. Riley was tagged, grinning in her reindeer sweater. Even Kevin Walsh from HR was tagged, and he'd only been in the shot because he'd photobombed us at the last second. But I, sitting right there in the center of the group, wearing that green velvet dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, was just a face without a blue tag. When I liked the post and left a comment, "Such a fun night, I still have that dress." Elena didn't respond with her usual array of emojis or follow-up comments. She'd always been quick to engage on social media, the type to like and comment on everything, to turn every post into a mini conversation. Her silence felt deliberate. 2 days later, something else happened that made my stomach tighten with that familiar feeling of exclusion I remembered from middle school. Our old group text, a chat called Westfield Survivors, that included 8 of us who had either left the company or been laid off during the restructuring, went completely silent. For 18 months, this chat had been a lifeline. We shared job leads, complained about our former boss, Mr. Patterson, and his impossible demands, sent memes about client feedback and agency life, celebrated each other's wins, and commiserated over rejections and difficult projects. The chat had been active just a week before Riley's strange phone call. Kevin had shared a link to a job opening at a nonprofit that seemed perfect for Emma Caldwell, who'd been struggling to find work after being laid off. Emma had responded with grateful crying face emojis. Alex had sent a GIF from the office that perfectly captured how we all felt about Monday mornings. Riley had shared a photo of the most ridiculous client request she'd received that week, a demand to make a logo more purple but also more green, with no other guidance. But after my conversation with Riley, the chat went dead. No job leads, no memes, no casual complaints about freelance life or updates about new positions, just silence. I sent a message asking how everyone was doing, shared a link to an interesting article about design trends, even tried to restart conversation with a funny story about a client who insisted their corporate colors should be the exact shade of a sunset, but more professional. Nothing. The little check marks showed that people were reading the messages, but no one responded. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. People get busy. Group chats go quiet sometimes. Maybe everyone was just dealing with their own work stress and didn't have energy for casual conversation. But the timing felt too convenient, too connected to Riley's weird behavior on the phone. The 3rd week after Riley's call, something happened that made it impossible to ignore the growing pattern. I was at the Whole Foods in Bellingham, loading organic apples into my cart and trying to decide if I could justify spending $12 on fancy cheese when I heard someone call my name. Jessica Novak, is that really you?" I turned around to see Ben Harrison pushing a cart toward me, a wide smile on his face that somehow didn't reach his eyes. Ben had been our creative director at Westfield, the guy everyone looked up to for his innovative campaigns and his ability to present even the most boring client work in ways that sounded exciting. He'd moved to Bellingham around the same time I did, taking a position at a smaller agency that promised better work-life balance.
We'd run into each other at coffee shops and farmers markets a few times since we both relocated, and our encounters had always been warm and natural, the kind of comfortable, professional friendship where you're genuinely happy to see each other, but don't feel obligated to become best friends. "Ben, how's the new agency treating you?" I said, genuinely pleased to see a familiar face. "Still fighting the good fight against boring corporate communications?" "Great, great," he said, but something in his expression had shifted the moment he recognized me. His smile became tighter, more forced. He kept glancing toward the store exit like he was calculating the fastest route to escape. "Everything's good, really good. How's the consulting business? Building that client empire?" "Getting there," I said, trying to match his energy while wondering why this felt so awkward. You know how it is with freelance work. Some months are great, others you're eating ramen and wondering if you made a terrible life choice. Ben laughed, but it sounded hollow. Right, right. Listen, I should probably run. Amanda's waiting in the car, and we've got dinner plans with her parents tonight. You know how that goes.
Of course. Tell Amanda I said hi, I called after him, but he was already speed walking toward the checkout lanes, pushing his cart like he was trying to outrun something. Ben had never been in a hurry to end our conversations before. Usually, he was the one suggesting we grab coffee and talk shop for another hour, the one asking detailed questions about my clients and offering advice about navigating the freelance world. He'd always seemed genuinely interested in my work, supportive of my decision to leave Westfield and strike out on my own. This abrupt departure felt completely out of character. Standing there in the produce section, watching Ben disappear around the corner toward the registers, I felt something click into place in my mind. Riley's strange phone call, Elena's failure to tag me in the photo, the group chat going silent, Ben's obvious discomfort at seeing me. These weren't separate incidents or coincidences. They were connected pieces of something larger, something I was only beginning to understand. That evening, I sat on my couch with a cup of chamomile tea and my laptop, doing something I'd never done before, actively investigating my former colleague's social media activity, like I was conducting some kind of digital surveillance operation. I felt slightly ridiculous, like a stalker or a paranoid ex-girlfriend, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Elena had posted about her daughter's soccer game, including a photo of 7-year-old Lucy scoring a goal, normal mom content. Riley had shared a recipe for lemon bars that looked amazing. Kevin had checked in at some craft brewery in Fremont I'd never heard of, posing with a flight of beers and a group of people I didn't recognize. Alex had posted a throwback photo from what looked like a hiking trip, all mountain views and sunshine. Everything seemed perfectly normal on the surface. These were the same types of posts my former colleagues had always shared: food, family, weekend activities, the occasional work achievement. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained the growing sense I had that something was happening just outside my field of vision, like a conversation in the next room that I could almost but not quite hear. But as I scrolled deeper, I started noticing subtler patterns. Comments between my former colleagues on each other's posts that seemed to reference shared experiences I didn't know about. Riley commenting on Elena's post about trying a new restaurant. "So glad we finally made it there. Next time we need to get the dessert you mentioned." Elena responding to one of Kevin's work updates with, "Can't wait to hear more about this at our next catch-up." Alex liking and commenting on posts from people I'd never heard of, people who seemed to know details about his life that I'd been cut out of. It was like watching a movie where half the dialogue had been muted. I could see that conversations were happening, that relationships were continuing and evolving, but I was no longer part of the narrative. Somehow, without any official announcement or dramatic confrontation, I had been quietly edited out of a social circle I'd thought I belonged to. I closed my laptop and stared out my apartment window at the lights of Bellingham Bay. The rational part of my mind kept insisting that I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into normal social media behavior and perfectly innocent coincidences. People drift apart after leaving jobs. Work friendships don't always translate to real friendships. Maybe I'd been naive to think that our relationships would continue unchanged after I left Westfield.
But there was another part of me, a deeper instinct that I'd learned to trust over 32 years of navigating friendships and professional relationships that insisted something more deliberate was happening. The timing was too convenient. The pattern was too consistent. The way Ben had looked at me in the grocery store, not just uncomfortable, but guilty, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't, suggested that this wasn't just natural drift. As I got ready for bed that night, brushing my teeth and changing into pajamas, I found myself thinking about all the late nights at Westfield, all the times we'd stayed past 7 o'clock working on urgent client requests, ordering takeout, and treating the office like our second home. I thought about the way Riley and I had supported each other through difficult projects and demanding clients, how we'd celebrated each other's successes and commiserated over setbacks. I thought about Elena teaching me how to write better copy, about Alex patiently explaining technical issues without ever making me feel stupid, about Ben advocating for my ideas in client meetings and pushing for my promotion to senior account manager. These weren't just professional relationships or casual work acquaintances. We'd shared real moments, real support, real friendship. We'd talked about our hopes and fears, our career goals and personal struggles. When I decided to leave Westfield to start my consulting business, they'd all seemed genuinely supportive, excited for my new adventure, promising to stay in touch and refer clients my way. What had changed? What had I done wrong? Or maybe the more accurate question was, what had I failed to do? I fell asleep that night with questions circling in my mind like water draining from a bathtub, creating a whirlpool of doubt and confusion that would only grow deeper in the weeks to come. I had no idea that I was about to discover just how wrong I'd been about my friendships, about my former colleagues' loyalty, and about my own place in the story we'd all been telling ourselves about our shared professional family. The truth was waiting for me on LinkedIn, 47 faces strong, smiling in matching t-shirts at a lakeside resort I'd never heard of, celebrating a reunion I'd never been invited to join.
The call came on a Friday morning in early April, exactly 3 weeks after my strange encounter with Ben at the grocery store. I was in the middle of wrestling with a particularly stubborn logo design for the veterinary clinic where I did bookkeeping. Dr. Patterson wanted something professional but friendly, modern but timeless, simple but memorable, when Riley's name popped up on my phone screen. "Jess, perfect timing," she said, and her voice had that bright, energetic quality I remembered from our best days at Westfield. "I was just thinking about you." "Riley, hi," I said, genuinely relieved to hear from her. After weeks of weird social media silence and awkward encounters, Riley's familiar warmth felt like stepping into a sunny room after being in the dark. "How are you? I've been wondering how that sustainable fashion campaign turned out." "Oh, it was amazing. The client loved everything, and we're already talking about phase 2. But listen, I'm calling because I have some news, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. There was an excitement there, but also something else, a careful quality, like she was choosing her words very deliberately. "What kind of news?" I asked, minimizing the logo file on my computer screen to give her my full attention. "Well, you know how it's been almost 10 years since the big restructuring at Westfield, when they laid off half the creative department and moved everyone around?" "Of course," I said. "How could I forget?" The restructuring had been traumatic for everyone who survived it, and devastating for those who didn't. It had changed the entire culture of the agency, turning what had once felt like a creative family into a more corporate, bottom-line focused environment. In many ways, it was the beginning of the end for the version of Westfield we'd all loved. So a few of us have been talking, just casually, about maybe doing something to mark the anniversary. Nothing big or formal, just a small get-together to catch up and remember the good times before everything changed. My heart did a little jump of excitement. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for without realizing it. A chance to reconnect with everyone, to figure out what had been going on with all the weird social dynamics lately, to feel like part of the group again. "That sounds amazing, Riley. What were you thinking? Dinner somewhere in Seattle? I could definitely drive down for a weekend." "Well, that's the thing," Riley said, and I could hear her walking somewhere, her voice echoing slightly like she was in a stairwell.
It's really going to be super casual. Just a few people, probably meeting for coffee or drinks. Nothing you'd want to drive 90 minutes for, honestly. I mean, you know how these things go. Everyone says they're excited, and then half the people cancel at the last minute, and you end up with like 4 people sitting around making awkward small talk about their kids and mortgages. I felt my excitement deflate slightly, but Riley's logic made sense. I'd been to enough half-hearted professional reunions to know that they could be more depressing than fun, especially when people were at different life stages and didn't have much in common beyond shared memories of difficult clients and long work hours. Right, of course, I said, but I'd still love to be included, even if it's just coffee. I miss everyone, and it's been way too long since we all hung out together. The thing is, Riley continued, and now her voice had that careful quality again, we're thinking of keeping it really small this time, like just the people who are still in Seattle and can meet up easily. We don't want to put pressure on anyone to travel or rearrange their schedules. You're so busy with your consulting work, and you've got that whole new life up in Bellingham. It seemed like asking you to drive all the way down for what might end up being just a quick coffee would be inconsiderate. There it was again, the assumption that I was too busy, too successful, too removed from their world to be interested in spending time with them. It stung, especially because it was so far from the truth. The reality was that I would have driven to Seattle for a 30-minute coffee meeting if it meant reconnecting with people who had been such an important part of my life. I would have rearranged client calls and canceled weekend plans. But somehow, Riley had decided that I wouldn't want to be bothered. Riley, I'm really not that busy, I said. I mean, yes, the consulting work keeps me occupied, but I'd love to see everyone, even if it's just for an hour or two. I know, she said quickly. And we definitely want to plan something bigger later in the year, maybe when the weather's better and we can do something outdoors. This is just going to be a quick, informal thing. Honestly, you'd probably be bored. It'll probably just be me and Elena and maybe Kevin complaining about our current jobs and reminiscing about how much we hated Mr. Patterson.
The way she said it made the gathering sound both insignificant and exclusive at the same time. Not important enough for me to attend, but important enough that specific people were being included while others weren't. I felt like I was being managed, handled, gently pushed away from something I wasn't supposed to want to be part of. When were you thinking of doing this? I asked, partly because I was genuinely curious and partly because some stubborn part of me wanted to make it clear that I was available, that distance and perceived busyness weren't actually barriers if they wanted me there. Oh, we haven't nailed down a date yet, Riley said vaguely. Probably sometime in the next month or two. You know how it is, trying to coordinate everyone's schedules. But like I said, it's going to be super low-key, nothing worth driving down for. I sat in my apartment office, staring out at the gray April sky over Bellingham Bay, feeling like I was having 2 different conversations at once. On the surface, Riley was being considerate, protecting me from a potentially disappointing social obligation. But underneath, it felt like she was constructing an elaborate justification for why I shouldn't be included in something that my former colleagues were planning without me. Well, keep me posted, I said finally. Even if it's just coffee, I'd love to see everyone. And if you do decide to plan something bigger later in the year, I'm definitely interested. Absolutely. You'll be the first person I call when we start planning something more official, Riley said, and her voice had that bright, false quality again. Anyway, I should probably get going. Client meeting in 10 minutes, and you know how I stress about being late. After she hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, trying to parse what had just happened. Riley's explanation made logical sense. Why would they ask someone to drive 90 minutes for a casual coffee meetup that might not even be that fun? But it also felt like a solution to a problem I hadn't created, an answer to a question I hadn't asked. The conversation reminded me of being in high school, when certain groups of friends would plan activities and then spend elaborate energy explaining why you wouldn't want to join them anyway. It was exclusion disguised as consideration, rejection framed as protection. The message was clear. You don't really belong here anymore, but we'll make it seem like it's for your own good. Over the next 2 weeks, I found myself paying even closer attention to social media activity from my former Westfield colleagues. Riley posted a photo from what looked like a wine bar in Capitol Hill, glasses raised in a toast with Elena and Kevin visible in the background. The caption read, "Friday night catch-ups with the best people." Elena shared a story from what appeared to be the same evening, a video of Kevin doing an impression of their old boss that had everyone cracking up. Alex posted a check-in at a restaurant in Fremont with the caption, "Good food, better company." None of these posts directly referenced the reunion, Riley, you had mentioned, but they showed my former colleagues spending time together regularly, creating new shared experiences and inside jokes, while I remained 90 minutes away, carefully managed out of their social circle. The exclusion might have stung less if it had been honest and direct. If Riley had simply said, "We're planning a reunion and we've decided not to invite you." I could have been hurt and angry and then moved on. But the elaborate fiction that this was for my own benefit, that I was too busy or too removed from their world to be interested, made everything worse. It turned my exclusion into something I was supposed to be grateful for. 2.5 weeks after Riley's call, I was having lunch with my friend Victoria Chen, who lived in Bellingham and worked as a graphic designer for a local nonprofit. Victoria and I had met through a freelancers networking group, and over the past year, she'd become one of my closest friends in town, someone who understood the challenges of self-employment and the way professional isolation could sometimes feel overwhelming. "You seem distracted today," Victoria said, putting down her sandwich and looking at me with concern. "Everything okay with work? That veterinary clinic still driving you crazy with their logo requests?" "Work's fine," I said, realizing I'd been picking up my salad without really eating it. "It's more of a social thing. Do you ever feel like you're being paranoid about friendship stuff? Like seeing patterns that might not actually be there?" "What kind of patterns?" I told her about Riley's call, about the casual reunion I wasn't being invited to, about the weeks of strange social media activity and awkward encounters. As I talked, I watched Victoria's expression change from curious to concerned to something that looked like recognition. "Jess," she said when I finished, "that's not paranoia. That's your intuition telling you something real is happening." "But maybe Riley's right," I said, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me. "Maybe I would be bored by a casual coffee meetup. Maybe it would be weird for me to drive all that way for something so low-key." "Do you want to go?" Victoria asked simply. "Yes, I really do. I miss them, and I want to understand what's been going on with everyone. Even if it's awkward or boring, I'd rather be there than sitting at home wondering what I'm missing." "Then Riley's logic doesn't matter," Victoria said. "If you want to be there, and they're your friends, then the distance and the casualness shouldn't be barriers. Friends figure out ways to include people, not reasons to exclude them." That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both brave and slightly reckless. I texted Elena directly, something I hadn't done in months. "Hey, Riley mentioned you guys might be planning a casual Westfield reunion. I'd love to join if you're still figuring out details. Miss everyone." I sent the message before I could second-guess myself, then spent the next hour trying to focus on client work while part of my brain obsessively wondered when Elena would respond. Her reply came 3 hours later. "Hi, Jess. Yeah, we've been talking about it. Still pretty loose plans at this point. We'll keep you posted if we nail down anything concrete." The response was friendly, but vague. Warm, but non-committal. It told me nothing about when or where this reunion might happen, who was organizing it, or what loose plans actually meant. It was the kind of response you give when you want to seem inclusive without actually including anyone. That evening, I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I created a Google alert for Westfield Creative Solutions reunion, and variations on my former colleagues' names combined with words like gathering, meetup, and anniversary. It felt invasive and slightly stalkerish, but I was tired of being managed and handled. If my former work friends were planning something they didn't want me to know about, I wanted to find out what it was.
For a week, the Google alerts turned up nothing except routine professional updates and social media posts I'd already seen. But then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, I got an alert that made my stomach drop. It was a brief mention in a Seattle business blog's event roundup. Local marketing professionals to gather at Cedar Lake Resort this weekend for Westfield Creative Solutions' 10-year anniversary celebration. The lakeside event promises networking opportunities and nostalgic reflection on a decade of industry changes. Cedar Lake Resort. Not a casual coffee meetup in Capitol Hill, not drinks at a wine bar with 4 people making awkward small talk, a lakeside event that sounded official and organized, the kind of gathering that required advanced planning and coordination. I stared at my laptop screen, reading the brief paragraph over and over again. This weekend. As in 3 days from now. As in something that had been planned for weeks or months, while Riley was telling me about vague future possibilities for casual coffee. I spent the next hour in a state of numb shock, processing the gap between what Riley had told me and what was apparently happening. The few people meeting for casual coffee had turned into a resort weekend that was significant enough to be mentioned in industry publications. The loose plans that might happen sometime in the next month or two were happening in 3 days. I had been lied to. Not just excluded, but actively deceived. Riley hadn't been protecting me from a boring obligation. She had been protecting the real event from my participation. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion itself. It was the elaborate care that had been taken to make sure I didn't know what I was being excluded from. The fake explanations, the careful management of my expectations, the construction of an alternative reality where my former work colleagues were planning something I wouldn't want to be part of anyway. They hadn't just decided not to invite me, they had decided to lie to me about it. All those weird social media interactions, all the awkward encounters and abrupt conversation endings, all the references to shared experiences I didn't know about, it all made sense now. My former work colleagues hadn't been drifting away from me naturally. They had been actively managing their communications to hide the fact that they were planning something significant without me. I thought about Riley's phone calls, the careful way she'd steered conversations away from certain topics, the way she'd presented herself as my advocate and protector while actually working to keep me in the dark. I thought about Elena's failure to respond to my texts with any real information, about Ben's obvious discomfort when he'd run into me unexpectedly. As I sat in my apartment with my coffee, staring out at the bay and trying to make sense of what felt like a personal and professional betrayal, one question kept circling through my mind. Why? Why had they gone to such elaborate lengths to exclude me? What had I done to deserve not just rejection, but deception? What had changed between the Jessica who had been part of their inner circle at Westfield and the Jessica who was now being carefully managed away from their reunion? But first, I had 3 days of false hope to get through. 3 days of believing that maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some other explanation. Maybe my former work family hadn't actually decided that I no longer belonged in the story we'd all been telling ourselves about our shared professional bond. I spent those 3 days in a strange state of suspended disbelief. Part of me hoping I'd misunderstood something about the blog post, part of me knowing with increasing certainty that everything I had been told for the past 2 months had been a carefully constructed lie designed to spare my feelings while protecting their event from my unwanted presence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.